Everyone talks about transformation. New goals, new routines, new willpower, new motivation. But the truth is simple. Your life changes when your habits change. And your habits don't need to be big. They don't need to be dramatic. They don't need to be extreme. Your brain is shaped by tiny, repeated behaviors. The choices you make every day without thinking, the routines you follow automatically, the patterns that run in the background of your life. Micro habits are the smallest, meaningful actions you can perform. Actions so small they are impossible to fail. Actions so repeatable they rewire your identity. Actions so consistent they create unstoppable momentum. This audiobook will teach you micro-habit engineering, the science of designing tiny behaviors that compound into extraordinary growth. Because 1% improvement every day doesn't look dramatic at first, but over months, years, and decades, it rewires your brain, transforms your identity, and reshapes your entire life. Small steps, strong habits, massive results. Chapter 1. The Power of 1%. Why Small Beats Big. The idea of 1% daily growth seems almost too simple to change a life. Yet it is one of the most powerful psychological and behavioral systems ever discovered. Most people imagine that transformation requires dramatic effort, massive lifestyle changes, sudden discipline, extreme routines, or giant leaps toward goals. But the human brain is not built for drastic change. Big habits trigger fear, resistance, and overwhelm. They activate the brain's alarm systems, making consistency nearly impossible. Small habits, however, slip past the brain's defenses. They're so tiny, so manageable, and so frictionless that your mind does not perceive them as threats. This is why 1% improvements, the smallest possible positive actions, become the foundational building blocks for long-term success. Small habits bypass resistance because they ask so little of you that your brain cannot justify avoiding them. When you tell yourself you only need to read 1 page, walk for 2 minutes, meditate for 1 minute, or write a single sentence, your mind relaxes. There is no internal negotiation, no anxiety, no procrastination cycle. You simply do it because it is easy. And once you start, you often do more by accident. The hardest part of any habit is starting, and micro habits make that barrier nearly invisible. A small action is the equivalent of opening the door. Once the door is open, momentum carries you forward. The brain loves tiny actions because they don't activate the fear centers responsible for resistance. Large goals, losing 20 kilograms, writing a book, launching a business, changing your identity, trigger the amygdala, the part of the brain that detects threat. Even if the goal is positive, the brain interprets big change as danger because it disrupts familiarity. But when the action is microscopic, the amygdala stays calm. The nervous system remains regulated. You enter the habit without emotional friction. This allows you to repeat the action consistently, which is the key to behavior change. Tiny habits work with your brain instead of fighting it. What makes micro habits astonishingly effective is compounding, the mathematical and psychological force that transforms microscopic effort into exponential results over time. One small improvement doesn't seem like much, but 1% growth every day compounds into a 37x improvement in a year. This is a motivational hype. It's math. A tiny action repeated daily becomes an unstoppable force. Every repetition strengthens neural pathways, making a habit easier. Every micro win increases motivation through dopamine release. Every tiny step shifts identity. I'm the kind of person who shows up. This compounding effect turns simple actions into extraordinary outcomes. Small wins create momentum because the brain rewards progress, not perfection. When you complete a micro habit, you experience the satisfaction of success. That success triggers dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure, motivation, and habit formation. Dopamine acts as fuel. It encourages you to repeat the behavior, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the habit. When you celebrate small wins, you strengthen the emotional wiring behind the habit. Your brain begins to crave the action because it associates it with reward. Over time, the habit becomes automatic. Consistency builds identity far faster than intensity. A single intense workout does not make you fit, but exercising for 5 minutes every day turns you into someone who never misses a workout. Writing for an hour once a month doesn't make you a writer, but writing one page daily rewires your identity until the behavior feels natural. Intensity gives short bursts of results, but identity is built through repetition. Micro habits are powerful because they make repetition easy. When the action is small, you can perform it daily without willpower. And when you perform a habit daily, your identity shifts effortlessly. You become what you consistently do. The true magic of 1% daily growth is that it transforms your life without overwhelming it. You don't need to change everything. You need to change one small thing each day. Over time, these micro shifts accumulate into massive transformation. The person who improves by 1% each day is not working harder. They're working smarter. They are aligning with the brain's natural wiring, using tiny steps to bypass resistance, leveraging dopamine to build motivation, and allowing compounding to amplify their effort. Big goals collapse under their own weight, but micro habits carry you forward lightly, steadily, and powerfully. They create long-term change because they respect how the brain works. They teach you that small is not weak, small is strategic. That consistency matters more than intensity. That identity is built through daily action, and that the path to extraordinary results is paved with tiny steps taken consistently, not giant leaps taken occasionally. 1% may sound small, but in reality, it is the beginning of a completely new life, one built on momentum, clarity, and unstoppable growth. Chapter 2: The Psychology Behind Microhabits. The power of microhabits is rooted in psychology and neuroscience. To understand why tiny actions create extraordinary change, you must first understand how the brain builds habits. Habits are automated behaviors, actions the brain performs with minimal conscious effort. This automation happens through the strengthening of neural pathways. Each time you repeat a behavior, the brain reinforces the connection between neurons, making the action easier and more automatic. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes effortless. This is why someone who has been exercising for years does not rely on willpower. Their brain has hardwired the habit. Microhabits use this exact mechanism, but in a gentle, sustainable way that doesn't trigger resistance. The brain is constantly seeking efficiency, not perfection. It wants to conserve energy, not waste it. When a task feels too large or too complex, the brain interprets it as a significant energy drain. This perception triggers procrastination, avoidance, or overthinking. But when the task is tiny, so small that it barely requires energy, the brain cooperates. It doesn't push back. It doesn't complain. It doesn't activate the fear centers that normally resist change. Microhabits work because they align with the brain's desire for simplicity and ease. They ask for so little that the brain willingly engages, creating a sense of progress that builds over time. One of the biggest psychological advantages of microhabits is that they slip past procrastination and ego resistance. Procrastination is not a productivity issue. It's an emotional issue. It appears when a task feels too heavy, too uncertain, or too demanding. The ego also resists anything that threatens its current identity. Big goals trigger self-doubt, fear of failure, and internal excuses. But tiny habits are non-threatening. They bypass emotional resistance because they're easy enough for the ego to accept. Instead of saying, "I'll do it later," your mind says, "I can do that now." This shift dramatically increases follow-through, making daily action far more sustainable. Micro-habits also act as priming mechanisms for larger actions. Starting small warms up the brain. It opens the door for deeper engagement. For example, reading one page often turns into reading 5. Doing one push-up often turns into 10. Writing one sentence often turns into a full paragraph. The reason is simple. Action creates momentum. Once the brain begins a task, it becomes easier to continue than to stop because it has already overcome the psychological barrier of starting. Micro-habits leverage this principle perfectly. They make starting so easy that continuation becomes natural. At the heart of micro-habit psychology is the concept of the minimum viable habit. This is the smallest possible version of a behavior that still moves you forward. It might be stretching for 30 seconds, journaling one line, drinking one glass of water, or meditating for 1 minute. The minimum viable habit ensures long-term success because it removes the biggest enemy of habit formation: inconsistency. Most people fail because they try to do too much too soon. Micro-habits guarantee progress even on busy, stressful, or low motivational days. When the baseline is tiny, the habit survives. And when the habit survives, growth continues. The most profound effect of micro-habits is on identity. Identity rewires not through intensity, but through consistency. When you show up daily, even for 1 minute, you send repeated signals to your brain. This is who I am now. If you meditate daily for 1 minute, you become someone who meditates. If you write one sentence daily, you become a writer. If you practice a skill for 1 minute each day, you become someone who learns. The brain doesn't measure identity by the size of the action. It measures identity by the frequency of the action. Repetition creates identity far faster than effort does. Every time you perform a micro-habit, you cast a vote for your future self. These votes accumulate until the new identity feels natural. And once identity shifts, behavior becomes automatic. You no longer need motivation to act because the action aligns with who you believe yourself to be. This is the essence of sustainable growth. Changing the story you tell yourself through repeated action, not through force. Micro-habits are powerful not because they are intense, but because they are repeatable. They work with the brain's natural wiring, not against it. They bypass resistance, create momentum, and build identity. They reduce the emotional burden of change and replace it with tiny, consistent wins that compound over time. When you understand the psychology behind micro-habits, you realize something profound. Big change doesn't begin with big actions. It begins with small shifts done repeatedly. The brain transforms through consistency, and micro-habits give you the structure to show up every single day. Chapter 3. Designing micro-habits that stick. Designing micro-habits that last requires intentionality. Anyone can start a habit, but very few people maintain one long enough to experience its compounding benefits. The key is to build habits that are so small, so clear, and so effortless that you can follow them even on your worst days. A micro-habit should feel like something you can complete without internal resistance. A behavior that is measurable, simple, and repeatable. When a habit is designed correctly, it becomes automatic. It integrates seamlessly into your life because it aligns with how the brain forms habits, not how motivation fluctuates. The first rule of designing lasting micro-habits is choosing habits that are measurable and effortless. A habit like read more is vague. A habit like read one page is measurable. A habit like exercise daily is overwhelming. A habit like do one push-up is effortless. When a habit is measurable, your brain knows exactly what success looks like. When it's effortless, your brain is more willing to follow through. The worst habit to build is one that depends on high energy or high motivation. A micro-habit succeeds because it requires neither. Your goal is to remove ambiguity and remove friction. That's how habits stick. The second principle is reducing the habit to the smallest possible version. People underestimate how small a micro habit can be. One push-up, one paragraph, 1 minute of meditation, one glass of water, one sentence for your book. A tiny action creates an entry point. It lowers the psychological barrier so dramatically that your mind cannot resist it. The brilliance of micro habits is not in the size of the action, but in the fact that they keep the habit alive. Once you complete the tiniest version, you often do more naturally. But the rule is simple. The micro version counts as a win. This prevents perfectionism and all-or-nothing thinking from destroying your momentum. A micro habit sticks more easily when it is obvious, meaning it stands out in your environment. The brain is highly influenced by visual cues. Objects in your surroundings act as triggers. If you want to read daily, leave your book on your pillow. If you want to stretch daily, leave the yoga mat in the middle of the room. If you want to write daily, open your document before going to bed so it's on your screen in the morning. If you want to drink more water, keep a filled bottle in your direct line of sight. Reminders and cues eliminate the need for memory or motivation. Your environment should act as the invisible coach that effortlessly prompts the behavior. One of the most effective ways to solidify micro habits is through habit stacking, attaching a new habit to an existing routine. The brain automatically clusters behaviors together. When you attach a micro habit to a habit you already do without thinking, it becomes easier to integrate. For example, after brushing your teeth, do 1 minute of breathing. After making your bed, read 1 page. After brewing coffee, write 1 sentence. After showering, stretch for 30 seconds. Habit stacking is powerful because you piggyback on an existing neural pathway instead of trying to create a new one from scratch. The habit becomes part of a sequence your brain already recognizes, making it far more likely to stick. Another essential part of designing microhabits is focusing on actions, not outcomes. Outcomes are motivating but not controllable. Actions are controllable and repeatable. When you attach your identity and self-worth to outcomes, losing weight, earning money, writing a book, you create pressure and fear around the habit. But when you focus on the action, 1 workout, $1 saved, 1 paragraph written, you make the habit emotionally safe. Micro habits thrive when they are behavior-based, not result-based. The outcome will come naturally through consistency, but the habit must be rooted in action. To keep a habit alive long-term, it must feel rewarding, not punishing. The human brain repeats behaviors that feel good and avoids behaviors that feel painful. If a habit feels like a burden, your mind will rebel. If it feels like a small win, your mind will cooperate. After completing your micro habit, give yourself a moment of acknowledgement, a mental celebration, a check mark, a small dopamine boost. This reinforcement teaches the brain. This behavior is beneficial. Make the habit enjoyable by pairing it with something pleasant. Music, a favorite drink, a comfortable environment. When a habit feels rewarding, your brain wants to return to it. Designing micro habits is not about forcing discipline. It's about engineering an environment and system where discipline becomes unnecessary. The goal is to remove friction, simplify action, and make repetition easy. When you choose measurable, effortless habits, reduce them to tiny versions. Place visual cues around your environment. Stack them with existing routines. Focus on action over outcome. And build in rewards, you create habits that are almost impossible to ignore. Micro habits stick not because they are small, but because they align with how the brain works. They make behavior change enjoyable, sustainable, and automatic. They make success a daily experience instead of a distant dream. And once a micro habit sticks, it becomes the foundation for bigger habits, deeper identity shifts, and long-lasting transformation. Chapter 4: Habit Stacking, the formula for automatic behavior. Habit stacking is one of the most effective ways to turn micro-habits into automatic behavior. The concept is simple. Instead of trying to create a new habit out of nowhere, you attach it to a routine you already perform without thinking. Stable routines like brushing your teeth, boiling water for coffee, locking the door, or washing your face serve as psychological anchors. They are reliable behaviors that happen at the same time, in the same context, with the same sequence every day. When you attach a new micro-habit to these anchors, your brain automatically links the two actions together, making the new habit easier to remember, easier to repeat, and far more likely to stick. The brain naturally forms connections between behaviors through repetition and sequence. When two actions repeatedly occur back to back, the brain begins treating them as a single pattern. This is how rituals form. For example, if you tie your shoes every time before leaving the house, your brain no longer treats tie shoes and leave as separate tasks. It turns them into one behavioral chain. Habit stacking uses this neurological phenomenon intentionally. By placing a micro-habit immediately after a routine you already do, you train your brain to treat the new habit as the next automatic step. Over time, the habit becomes as natural as the routine it's attached to. The power of habit stacking lies in eliminating decision fatigue. Most people fail to maintain habits because they have to constantly decide when and how to act. Decisions drain energy, and when the brain feels tired, it defaults to the easiest option, avoidance. Habit stacking removes the need for decision-making by creating a simple rule. After I do X, I do Y. This formula creates clarity. There's no negotiation, no planning, no guesswork. The action becomes part of a fixed sequence, removing mental resistance and creating the conditions for automatic behavior. The brain performs best when it follows predictable patterns, and habit stacking gives it exactly that. Stacking habits creates a powerful chain of positive actions. One tiny behavior triggers another, which triggers another, building momentum without force. A single habit stack might look like: after brushing my teeth, I drink a full glass of water. After drinking water, I stretch for 30 seconds. After stretching, I take 3 deep breaths. In just a few minutes, you've created a micro-routine that improves hydration, flexibility, and emotional regulation, all from stacking small actions. The chain effect is more powerful than any single habit because it compounds benefits and makes growth part of your everyday rhythm. The key is to start with one small stack, not 10. Many people get excited about building routines and stack too many habits at once, overwhelming themselves and collapsing the entire system. A habit stack should begin with one anchor routine and one micro habit. Once that pairing becomes automatic, you can safely expand it. Think of habit stacking like building a necklace. You attach one bead at a time, forming a longer chain only after the previous link is secure. Small, stable stacks create long-term consistency. Rushing the process creates instability and burnout. Habit stacking becomes especially powerful when applied to mornings and evenings, the two most influential windows of your day. Mornings set your direction. Evenings determine your recovery. When you stack a series of micro-habits at these times, you transform them into growth systems. For example, morning stack. After making coffee, journal 1 line. After journaling, read 1 page. After reading, review top 3 priorities. Evening stack. After brushing teeth, reflect on 1 win from the day. After reflection, stretch for 1 minute. After stretching, prepare clothes for tomorrow. These small sequences anchor your day in structure, clarity, and self-improvement. Morning stacks create momentum. Evening stacks promote calmness and reset your mind for the next day. The beauty of stacked habits is that they don't require motivation. They rely on automaticity. Once the system is in place, your day begins and ends with consistency. Habit stacking works because it respects how the brain functions. It doesn't fight your biology, it collaborates with it. Instead of forcing discipline, it uses natural neurological patterns to make growth effortless. Over time, your stacked habits form a lifestyle, a system of repeated actions that continuously push you toward your goals. When you stack micro-habits onto stable routines, you create a structure that builds discipline without effort, consistency without pressure, and transformation without overwhelm. One routine becomes the foundation for another, and gradually, your entire life becomes aligned with growth. Through stacking, your days stop being random. They become intentional, stable, and powerful. Chapter 5: Identity Engineering, Becoming the 1% Stronger You. Identity engineering is the deepest and most transformative layer of micro-habit mastery. While many people try to change their lives through motivation, force, or intensity, real transformation happens at the identity level. Identity is the internal story you tell yourself about who you are, your capabilities, your tendencies, your strengths, and your limitations. Most people don't realize it, but identity governs behavior far more than willpower ever will. You do not act according to the goals you set. You act according to the identity you believe. This is why you can set resolutions every year but fall back into the same patterns. Your identity never changed. Identity is not built through intention. It is built through repeated action. You can desire to be disciplined, organized, healthy, creative, or confident, but desire alone cannot override your existing identity. The brain requires evidence. Every micro-habit becomes a piece of that evidence, a small but powerful vote for the person you want to become. When you meditate for 1 minute, you cast a vote for being a calm person. When you exercise for 1 minute, you cast a vote for being a healthy person. When you write one sentence, you cast a vote for being a writer. It doesn't matter how small the action is. What matters is that it reinforces the identity. Micro-habits make identity change accessible because they give you consistent, undeniable proof of who you are becoming. Identity shifts always happen before major transformation becomes visible. People assume transformation is an external process. Losing weight, writing a book, building a business, developing discipline, but the internal shift happens first. When your identity upgrades, your actions change naturally. You no longer force yourself to behave a certain way. You behave that way because it aligns with who you believe you are. You no longer have to drag yourself through habits. The habits become obvious extensions of your internal story. Identity is the root. Behavior is the branch. Outcomes are the fruit. If you want different outcomes, you must first grow different roots. One of the most powerful identity upgrades is shifting from "I want to be disciplined" to "I am someone who shows up." The first statement is aspirational and belongs to a future version of yourself. The second statement is declarative. It belongs to the present. When you anchor your identity in action rather than desire, the brain adjusts. This shift removes pressure and introduces clarity. It doesn't matter how big or small the action is. Showing up is the core behavior of every successful identity. When you identify as someone who shows up, you no longer negotiate with yourself at every step. You simply follow through because that is who you are. Behavior proves identity, and identity fuels behavior. This cycle is the engine behind long-term growth. When your behavior aligns with your identity, consistency becomes natural. When your identity aligns with your behavior, confidence becomes automatic. But when behavior and identity conflict, sabotage appears. For example, if you see yourself as unmotivated, every attempt to change becomes exhausting. If you see yourself as inconsistent, every habit collapses under doubt. When identity weakens, behavior suffers. When identity strengthens, behavior becomes effortless. This is why identity engineering is essential. It creates internal alignment that eliminates friction. Identity engineering works through 3 steps: action, reinforcement, integration. Action. You perform a micro-habit that represents the identity you want. Reinforcement. You acknowledge that action as evidence of who you are becoming. Integration. Over time, your brain rewrites your internal story to match the evidence. Through repetition, these micro-actions accumulate until the new identity becomes your default mode. You no longer question whether you can show up. You act because it feels natural. This internal alignment is what ultimately drives sustainable, long-lasting transformation. The biggest mistake people make is trying to build habits without changing their identity. They focus on behavior but ignore the internal story. They try to change their life while holding onto an identity shaped by old experiences, old environments, and old patterns. Identity engineering deliberately reshapes that story. It allows you to release the old labels that kept you stuck. I'm lazy, I'm inconsistent, I'm easily distracted, I can't change. These labels were never truths. They were learned narratives. Micro-habits help you replace them with empowered identities grounded in consistent evidence. Identity engineering is the core of long-term change because it ensures that your transformation is not temporary. It makes growth part of your identity, not part of phase. When you engineer your identity through daily actions, you no longer depend on motivation. You no longer fight resistance. You no longer fear inconsistency. You become the kind of person who moves forward naturally. Becoming the 1% stronger you is not about becoming a different person. It is about uncovering the version of yourself that was always capable and reinforcing that identity through daily evidence. Micro-habits give you the tools. Identity engineering ensures the change lasts. When your identity rises, your entire life rises with it. Chapter 6. Breaking old patterns with micro-habits. Old habits don't survive because you lack discipline. They survive because the brain is wired for familiarity, efficiency, and repetition. Every habit, whether helpful or destructive, is anchored to specific triggers and reinforced by the environment in which it lives. A craving, a time of day, a place, a mood, or even a smell can automatically fire a habit loop without your conscious awareness. Your brain is not trying to sabotage you. It is simply trying to conserve energy by repeating what it has done before. To break old patterns, you must understand that habits don't respond to motivation. They respond to cues, convenience, and context. The key to dismantling destructive routines is not to force yourself to stop them, but to replace them with small, competing micro-habits. When the brain expects a behavior, checking your phone, overeating, procrastinating, reacting emotionally, you can interrupt the loop by inserting a tiny alternative action. If you tend to scroll your phone when stressed, replace it with one deep breath. If you snack mindlessly at night, drink a sip of water first. If you procrastinate on work, open the document for just 10 seconds. These replacement habits must be so small and easy that the brain accepts them without resistance. Over time, the new behavior begins to overwrite the old one because it consistently appears at the same trigger point. You don't delete the habit loop, you redirect it. Another powerful strategy is creating friction for your bad habits. Bad habits thrive because they are easy to access. They require no thought, no effort, and no barrier. To weaken them, increase the inconvenience. Put your phone in another room while working. Uninstall distracting apps from your home screen. Keep unhealthy snacks out of sight or out of the house entirely. Block websites during work hours. Lay out gym clothes the night before so exercise becomes easier to start than skipping it. When you make a bad habit harder to begin, your brain becomes less likely to choose it. Friction doesn't rely on willpower. It adjusts the environment so the destructive habit loses its grip. Interrupting autopilot behavior is essential for breaking old patterns, and this is where tiny interrupt habits come in. Interrupt habits are small actions designed to break your unconscious loop before it completes. These can be actions like pausing for 3 seconds before reacting, taking a deep inhale when you feel triggered, writing one sentence when procrastination starts, or standing up for 10 seconds when you feel the urge to scroll. These micro-interruptions create space between impulse and action. That space is where transformation happens. The moment you interrupt the automatic loop, you weaken its wiring and strengthen your control. Rewiring old habits requires repetition, not perfection. The brain doesn't change because you want it to. It changes because you repeatedly teach it a new pattern. Every time you insert a micro habit instead of the old behavior, you carve a new neural pathway. The brain doesn't care if the action is small. It cares that the action is consistent. Perfectionism slows progress because it creates emotional resistance. But small, repeated behaviors steadily replace the old loop. You don't need to break the habit completely on day one. You only need to interrupt it consistently enough for the new pattern to gain strength. The truth is that you can't fully remove a habit from the brain. The neural pathway always exists, but you can override it with a stronger, more frequent, more emotionally rewarding behavior. The old habit becomes weaker, less automatic, and less appealing because the new habit eventually becomes your default. This is why replacement is more effective than elimination. You're not fighting the old pattern, you're building a better one. You're giving your brain a new script to follow. Breaking old patterns with micro habits is not about force or willpower. It's about intelligently redesigning the habit loop. By adjusting your triggers, environment, friction levels, and automatic responses, you gradually transform behaviors that once felt impossible to change. You reclaim control not through dramatic effort, but through mindful, repeated micro-interruptions and gentle rewiring. Over time, the old patterns fade. The new patterns take root, and you evolve into someone who no longer battles their habits. You become someone who has redesigned them to align with your growth. Chapter 7. Building Momentum, the Compounding Effect. Momentum is the invisible force that transforms tiny, inconsistent efforts into unstoppable growth. It begins with something simple, a win. Any win, even the smallest, builds confidence. And that confidence becomes fuel. When you complete a micro habit, you send your brain a powerful message. I can do this. That belief shifts your internal chemistry. Dopamine increases, motivation rises, and your mind becomes more willing to take the next step. Confidence isn't something you wait for. It is something you build through small victories. One tiny win can create the emotional spark that ignites a chain reaction of action. Momentum grows fastest when effort remains small but consistent. Most people think growth requires extreme discipline, long hours, or massive bursts of effort. But the brain resists pressure. What it loves is continuity. A 2-minute habit done every day is more powerful than a 1-hour habit done once a week. Repetition, not intensity, creates momentum. Small actions create a psychological rhythm your brain begins to expect. Each repetition strengthens the neural pathway and makes the behavior easier to repeat. Over time, the effort doesn't feel like effort anymore. It feels like your natural flow. To build momentum, you must avoid the trap of all-or-nothing thinking. This mindset destroys progress because it demands perfection. One missed day becomes a failure. One imperfect attempt becomes a reason to quit. But life doesn't operate on perfection. It operates on patterns. A 1% action is always better than doing nothing. When you remove the pressure to be perfect, you free yourself to be consistent. Consistency creates the compounding effect, the gradual accumulation of effort that grows exponentially over time. When you stay consistent, you stop relying on motivation and start relying on rhythm. Tracking your progress is a powerful way to reinforce momentum loops. The brain loves evidence. When you see your progress visually, a habit tracker, a checklist, a calendar with streaks, you create a sense of accomplishment that strengthens your commitment. Tracking converts invisible progress into a visible, measurable form. It gives your brain a reward every time you mark a win. This reward reinforces the loop. Action, progress, dopamine, motivation, more action. The more evidence you collect, the harder it becomes to break your streak. Tracking turns your progress into a game where you continually want to keep winning. Celebrating micro wins is essential for maintaining momentum. Celebration is not about ego, it's about chemistry. When you acknowledge your small accomplishments, dopamine surges in the brain. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that signals reward and motivates repetition. A tiny celebration, a nod of pride, a check mark, a smile, a moment of acknowledgement strengthens the emotional association with the habit. When the brain links a behavior to reward, it becomes far more likely to repeat it. Micro wins, when celebrated, become the foundation of sustainable momentum. Momentum turns discipline into a natural rhythm, something you fall into rather than something you fight for. When you create momentum, habits no longer feel like obligations. They feel automatic, predictable, and even enjoyable. This is where true transformation happens. You stop relying on willpower. You stop restarting every Monday. You stop falling into cycles of burnout and guilt. Momentum becomes the invisible support system that carries you forward even when motivation fades. It builds internal stability, a sense of steady movement that keeps you progressing day after day. Momentum is not accidental, it is engineered. It is created through micro habits, tiny wins, consistent repetition, tracking, and celebration. When you commit to the smallest possible actions and repeat them daily, the compounding effect begins working in your favor. Your habits build confidence. Confidence builds consistency. Consistency builds momentum. And momentum builds success. The compounding effect is simple but life-changing. Tiny daily actions, unstoppable long-term transformation. Once momentum takes over, your growth accelerates. Not because you're trying harder, but because you've learned how to leverage the psychology of small wins into a force far greater than willpower alone. Chapter 8. Environmental Engineering for Microhabit Success. Your environment is one of the strongest forces shaping your behavior. You may believe habits depend on motivation or willpower, but research shows that environment influences actions far more powerfully than internal desire. The spaces you live and work in constantly send cues to your brain. These cues determine what you notice, what you avoid, what you remember, and what you naturally do without thinking. If your environment is cluttered, chaotic, or full of distractions, your habits will reflect that chaos. But if your environment is designed intentionally, it becomes a silent partner that nudges you toward consistency and growth. When you shape your environment strategically, micro habits become almost effortless. The first step in environmental engineering is removing clutter and distractions. Clutter increases cognitive load, the mental effort needed to process your surroundings. When your environment is full of random objects, unfinished tasks, or visual noise, your brain burns energy simply trying to filter out irrelevant information. This weakens focus, lowers motivation, and increases resistance. A clean, minimal, organized environment reduces mental friction. Your mind becomes clearer, which makes it easier to stick to your micro habits. Clutter isn't just physical, it's psychological. By creating order in your environment, you create order in your habits. To make micro habits stick, your tools must be visible and accessible. Habits fail not because they're difficult, but because they're forgotten or hidden behind obstacles. If you want to read daily, your book should be on your pillow or desk, not buried in a drawer. If you want to journal, keep your notebook open beside your bed. If you want to exercise, lay out your workout clothes the night before. If you want to hydrate, place a water bottle on your desk. When the cue for a habit is visible, the brain treats it as a prompt to act. The easier it is to start, the more likely you are to repeat the behavior. Just as important as making good habits easy is making unwanted habits invisible or inconvenient. Bad habits thrive when they are accessible. If snacks are on the table, you'll eat them. If your phone is beside you, you'll scroll. If distracting apps sit on your home screen, you'll open them without thinking. By adding friction, you break the automatic loop. Put snacks out of sight. Keep your phone in another room during work. Remove social media apps from your home screen. Block distracting websites. These tiny adjustments weaken the triggers that feed bad habits. When a behavior becomes harder to start, your brain naturally avoids it. Inconvenience is one of the simplest but most effective habit-breaking tools. Your environment also includes the people around you, the social atmosphere that shapes your mindset, energy, and habits. You become a reflection of your surroundings, and that includes people's routines, attitudes, and behaviors. If you spend time with people who constantly complain, procrastinate, gossip, or avoid growth, their rhythm will influence yours. But when you surround yourself with individuals whose habits align with your future self, people who read, exercise, create, plan, build, and grow, you absorb their momentum. You elevate your standards. Your habits naturally shift upward. Energy is contagious. Discipline is contagious. Growth is contagious. Choosing the right environment means choosing people who amplify your identity, not people who reinforce your old patterns. A supportive environment makes micro-habits feel effortless. When everything in your space points you toward your desired behavior, you no longer rely on motivation. Your surroundings do the heavy lifting for you. This is the secret behind your most consistent behaviors. You don't try to brush your teeth. The environment, bathroom, toothbrush routine makes the habit automatic. When you apply the same principle to other areas of your life, consistency becomes your default mode. You create a lifestyle where good habits happen naturally because the environment is designed for them. Environmental engineering is about shaping your physical and social world to support your internal goals. It's about removing friction, reducing distractions, increasing visibility, and aligning your surroundings with the person you're becoming. A well-designed environment transforms micro-habits from tasks into natural behaviors. It becomes the quiet force that keeps you moving forward even when motivation dips. When your environment supports your growth, success stops feeling like effort. It becomes the path of least resistance. This is how micro-habits flourish. This is how long-term transformation becomes inevitable. Chapter 9. Tracking, Measuring, and Optimizing Growth. Tracking your habits is one of the most reliable ways to increase consistency and long-term success. When you measure a behavior, you immediately become more aware of it. This awareness alone has been shown to increase habit consistency by 2 to 3 times. Tracking transforms invisible effort into visible progress. It turns small, daily actions into tangible proof that you're growing. Without tracking, progress often goes unnoticed, and unnoticed progress feels like no progress. But when you measure even the smallest wins, your brain begins to associate action with reward. This psychological reinforcement fuels motivation, strengthens discipline, and stabilizes momentum. The tools you use for tracking don't need to be complex. In fact, simple tools tend to produce better long-term adherence. Habit trackers, daily checklists, and calendar streaks all work extremely well because they are easy to maintain. A habit tracker gives you a clear visual representation of your consistency. A daily checklist provides structure and a sense of closure. A calendar streak creates a chain effect. Every consecutive day you complete a habit strengthens the desire to keep the streak alive. These simple methods turn progress into a visual cue that encourages continued effort. When your progress is displayed clearly, you feel more invested in maintaining it. Weekly reviews are essential for optimizing growth. They allow you to step back, analyze patterns, and make strategic adjustments rather than blindly repeating the same mistakes. A weekly review should ask 3 questions. What worked well? What didn't work? What needs adjusting for next week? By reflecting on these questions, you avoid the trap of running on autopilot. You begin to see where your habits thrive and where they break down. You identify which habits feel natural and which require refinement. Weekly reviews also prevent discouragement. They show you that even if you struggled in some areas, you succeeded in others. This balanced view fuels motivation and helps you refine your system over time. A major part of optimizing growth is identifying bottlenecks, the specific obstacles that slow you down or interrupt your flow. Bottlenecks vary from person to person. An overly complicated habit, an inconvenient environment, a mental barrier, a time of day mismatch, or even emotional resistance. Once you identify these bottlenecks, the solution is usually simple. Remove friction. If a habit is too big, shrink it. If the cue is unclear, make it obvious. If the environment is distracting, redesign it. If the time of day feels wrong, shift the schedule. Optimization is not about making habits harder. It's about making them easier by removing unnecessary obstacles. Celebrating streaks is a critical part of habit reinforcement. Each consecutive day you complete a habit strengthens your identity as someone who shows up. Streaks are powerful because they combine psychology and emotion. They create a sense of pride, momentum, and personal accountability. When you see a sequence of completed days, your brain wants to protect it. This desire strengthens consistency far more effectively than willpower or motivation. Streaks turn habits from struggles into accomplishments, and accomplishments into identity. Identity reinforcement is one of the biggest benefits of tracking. Each checkmark becomes evidence of who you are becoming. Each streak strengthens the internal belief. I am consistent. I show up daily. I follow through. The more evidence your brain collects, the stronger your identity becomes. And once identity is solid, behavior becomes almost effortless. Tracking is not just about recording actions. It's about shaping the story you tell yourself. When you track, measure, and optimize regularly, growth becomes predictable rather than emotional or random. You no longer rely on bursts of motivation. You rely on data, clarity, and consistency. You see what works, refine what doesn't, and improve the system each week. Instead of guessing whether you're progressing, you have proof. Instead of hoping you'll stay consistent, you create conditions that make consistency inevitable. Tracking turns growth into a structured system. Measuring turns progress into momentum. Optimizing turns effort into mastery. When you combine all three, you create a self-correcting loop of improvement that compounds month after month. With tracking in place, your micro-habits stop being tiny actions. They become the blueprint for a predictable, repeatable, and unstoppable growth system. Chapter 10. The 1% Lifestyle. Living a micro-habit life. The 1% lifestyle is not built on dramatic transformations, motivational highs, or bursts of extreme discipline. It is built on systems, small, reliable processes that guide your behavior regardless of your mood. When your day is structured around micro-habits, you no longer need to wait for motivation to strike. You don't rely on willpower or emotional strength to push through resistance. Instead, your systems carry you. They act as an invisible framework that supports your growth even on days when you feel tired, distracted, or unmotivated. This is the foundation of the 1% lifestyle. Your actions are consistent because they are automatic, not because you feel inspired. Small improvements each day, when repeated long enough, evolve into mastery. A 1% improvement seems insignificant in the moment, but over months and years, these tiny steps accumulate into massive transformation. The compounding effect turns microscopic progress into exponential growth. Mastery doesn't come from intensity, it comes from repetition. A writer becomes a master by writing daily, not occasionally. A fit person becomes healthy through daily movement, not one intense workout. A disciplined person becomes consistent through small daily commitments, not sudden strictness. Micro habits create the conditions for mastery by making daily progress feel attainable and sustainable. You become unstoppable when your habits are automatic. When your micro actions require no mental effort, the habit becomes a part of your identity. You brush your teeth without thinking. You lock the door without hesitation. These are actions that require zero willpower because they are anchored into your nervous system. When growth-oriented habits, reading 1 page, walking 2 minutes, meditating for a moment, reviewing goals, tidying for 60 seconds, become equally automatic, self-improvement stops feeling like work. It becomes a natural extension of your daily rhythm. Automatic habits create unstoppable momentum because they remove the emotional friction that usually causes inconsistency. As these habits embed themselves, your identity upgrades organically. You don't have to force yourself to become disciplined, confident, creative, or healthy. You grow into those identities naturally through repeated action. When you perform a habit daily, even for a minute, you send continual signals to your brain. This is who I am now. Over time, your self-image shifts. You start seeing yourself as the type of person who reads, exercises, plans ahead, creates, learns, and grows. Not because you try to change your identity, but because your actions redefine it for you. Growth becomes self-reinforcing instead of effort-driven. The greatest illusion of transformation is that it requires huge, painful shifts. But the truth is that macro success is always built on micro habits. Writing books is built on writing sentences. Building businesses is built on completing small tasks. Improving health is built on simple daily choices. Emotional stability is built on small rituals of reflection and grounding. Financial freedom is built on consistent micro savings. Everything big is built from something small, repeated long enough. Micro habits create a foundation so strong that results feel inevitable rather than exhausting. The 1% life is built slowly, then suddenly. At first, changes are invisible. You won't see much difference after 1 day of 1% improvement. A week might feel similar. A month shows subtle shifts. 3 months create clear momentum. 6 months reshape your identity. A year transforms your life. The shift happens quietly until one day everything looks different. People will ask how you changed so much, but they won't see the tiny, consistent choices that built your transformation. The sudden breakthrough is simply the final stage of long-term compounding. Living a micro-habit life means embracing the power of the small, the consistent, and the manageable. It means trusting that tiny wins become unstoppable momentum. It means designing systems so strong that your growth becomes predictable. It means no longer chasing perfection, only showing up. It means living each day 1% better and allowing time to multiply your effort. The 1% lifestyle is not glamorous, but it is transformative. It is slow in the beginning, but powerful in the end. And once the compounding kicks in, you become the kind of person who grows automatically, someone whose life expands steadily, quietly, and undeniably. This is the path to mastery. This is the path to long-term success. This is the path to your future self, built 1% at a time. Transformation doesn't come from dramatic change. It comes from daily change, from small actions repeated consistently, from tiny decisions made thousands of times, from identity built in quiet moments of discipline. You now understand the true power of micro-habit engineering, how 1% shifts reshape your brain, how tiny wins build unstoppable momentum, how small habits create lasting identity, and how consistent action builds a life you're proud of. Growth isn't loud. Growth is subtle. It's the 1% you choose today, repeated tomorrow, repeated next week, repeated until the world looks at you and calls it talent, discipline, or success. But you'll know the truth. It was the micro habits that built everything. Start small. Stay consistent. Become unstoppable.